All right, good afternoon, and I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Miranda McCall, and I'm the Acting Director of Financial Aid for the Karsh Office of Undergraduate Financial Support. And I am joined today by a number of colleagues from that office. If you're part of our office, would you just mind waving so folks can see your friendly faces? Here we are. We're here to support you through your academic time here at Duke. Um, and one of the things that I'd like to stress is that while we may be virtual, it does not mean we are out of reach. And you can be in contact with us a number of ways. And I think that as we go through this, that's one of the most important points that I can stress. The best way to get in contact with us is via email. You have, if you've been to the sessions on the other days, you may have heard us talk about the importance of Duke Hub. That is a website or an app on your phone. It's where you'll be able to see your financial aid offers, but a lot of other information lives out there as well. But one of the nice things that you'll see when you're on there is that you can just click a link and email your financial aid counselor directly from Duke Hub. And so that's the best way to get in touch with us. You can also use our general email, which is finaid@duke.edu. And we'll put up a slide that has all that information on it later in today's presentation. But I want to put that out there. You also have the opportunity, if needed, to talk with your counselor. We are pretty savvy and book appointments online. We meet virtually in forums a lot like this. And so we're not far away. Today's topic, and the reason that I stress that importance, is because we're here to talk about special circumstances, appeals, things that might be going on in your life that weren't reflected on your aid application and maybe weren't something that you were able to put down on paper. These are usually pretty personal circumstances, and so I realize how important that personal connection might be for you as you go through the process. So I just want you to know we're still here. We know you can't come in and sit across the desk from us, but we are putting measures in place to make sure we are as accessible as we have ever been for you. And so to that end, I'm going to start. It's a really brief presentation about, first of all, what appeals are, what we can consider. Just in brief overview, we'll be talking about how to actually begin that process. And I'm going to allow actually the majority of our time today to take your questions. I imagine that you have a number of them. One of the first questions that we get, and I'm just going to address this piece at the outset, which is not to panic if the financial aid offer that you saw when you came to Duke isn't out there for you to view right now. A lot of people think something's gone wrong. And so I just want to answer for you that it's okay. Nothing's gone wrong. We're making adjustments to your aid offers because after we made those initial offers, the federal government offered better loans and at better rates than what you might have received in your initial aid offer. We want to make sure that we give you the best loans. And so we're making some adjustments to those to get back to you. You should have access to those again by next week. And so just give us a minute to make those changes, and then you'll be back in Duke Hub seeing what's out there for you. So that being said, I am just going to share my screen with you briefly so that we can go over my presentation. And all right, is everyone able to see the presentation on the screen now? Thank you. All right, so let's get started. Let's talk about what an appeal does. First of all, there might be some of you out there who didn't apply for aid. Maybe you thought at the outset that you wouldn't qualify, but now you have quite different circumstances. I first want to stress it's not too late to apply for aid. You can still go out and complete our application. The steps are online. We can still consider it. It's never too late to apply for aid in the fall semester. You can do it at any point, and you can even do it through the early spring for the academic year. So don't feel as if you have missed your opportunity if you've not applied yet. I think for most of you, you've probably already received a financial aid offer. And so if you're contacting us to appeal it, chances are you are looking for an increase in that financial aid. And so the result of appeals generally increases the amount of aid that you would receive, and reduces the amount that your family would be expected to pay. A common question we get is, how did you even come up with that number? And there are a lot of things that go into it, but what folks typically don't realize is that when we're putting together your aid offer, there are a lot of things that we consider about your situation, and they're already included in that initial aid offer. So this is a list of some of those things. We include even more on our website. But if you have another sibling in college, or you've got a younger sibling that your family's trying to save for because they want to send them to college, we actually take all of those things in a formula into consideration when we put together that first aid offer. So that wouldn't qualify as a special circumstance or an appeal for us. We take into consideration if you've got a sibling in private school, and if your family had medical expenses and they actually entered those on their tax returns, we go ahead and take that information into consideration right when we process your initial aid award. But there's actually a whole list of things that we've put on our site that you might want to take a look at to see if that might already be included. But there are plenty of things that we can't know about you through your application process. And these are the things that would constitute the basis for an appeal for financial aid. We have a pretty extensive list on our website of what some of those situations might be. Doesn't mean your situation is listed, but we put together some of the most common ones. We hear sometimes, especially in this environment, a parent may have lost a job or been forced to relocate. And so you may have expenses for housing in two different places if you've got one parent living somewhere else. That's something that we might not have known about when you did your initial financial aid offer. You could appeal on that basis. We know that sometimes in the sandwich generation, your parents may be taking care of their parents and also trying to send you to school. We can take into consideration some of that if you told us that on your initial application, but if you didn't, that's something that you could let us know. Sometimes one year looks really different than another. Maybe you had income in one year that was very different than what you see on a normal basis. And so what we're using to put together your financial aid offer isn't really reflective of what the resources are for your family in this year. That's something that you could tell us. If your family didn't tell us about medical expenses in their taxes, you could submit a form and tell us about those as well. And we've highlighted here job loss or reduction of income, because I think this is maybe the largest and most frequent question that we're getting, particularly right now in this economy and environment. And so we'll spend some time talking about that as we go. I'll get right to the heart of it. A lot of what we're hearing is the result of changes brought about by COVID-19. When you applied to Duke, there was an application available at that time where you could tell us that your family might have been impacted by COVID. And we processed the applications that we received at the time, but that was, April. And here we are this many more months in, and we understand that your situation may have changed, or maybe things weren't as bad in April and now you're in a very different circumstance. And so we have reopened the application to allow you to appeal on the basis of income reduction or job loss related to COVID. So if you have someone who in your family who has been laid off, whose pay has been reduced, maybe who has been furloughed for a period of time, we have been getting some questions from folks that say, my family owns a business. What do I do? They don't get wage statements, but how can I show that our business isn't doing as well because of COVID? And that's common, unfortunately. Inside the application for this, there's actually a form, and it's called the Business or Farm Supplement. And you can complete that. There's a column for what happened in 2019 as a basis for us, and then we can use a column for 2020 where you can tell us what's going on now. And so you can complete that, and then we may reach back out to you for additional information based on the information you give us on that form. But we can take these things into consideration. This says that we will be sending out an application link to all students shortly. That was written this morning. And since then, we just sent out the email. So it may already be sitting in your inbox. There's an email and it will say financial aid updates. And it's a very important email. Don't be tempted to skip over it. It has critical information in it that you need to make sure that your aid is correct for this year and that we can take everything into consideration. So please, please, please open that email. It has this link in it. It's also posted on our website. And it'll be posted on the Keep Learning website where you'll find plenty of updates as well. And it also has other updates in it that can save you money. So please take a look at it when you get the opportunity. Well, if, let's say, you have questions about what would happen, maybe it isn't related to COVID-19, but you are in a situation where you may still want to appeal on the basis of income. Some things, this says you can submit your 2020 taxes. So maybe you're still trying to see what the impact of 2020 is. Maybe it hasn't hit quite yet, but you're expecting something to change between now and the end of the year. In your case, what we'd ask for you to do, if it's something you're anticipating but haven't experienced yet, when we close out 2020, believe it or not, we're just now rounding the corner on just over halfway through. It has seemed like a long year, but we've still got plenty to go. When we get to the end of the year, as soon as your 2020 taxes are available, and hopefully you can file those early, if you can get those to us in early spring, we can take what actually happened in 2020 and do a reevaluation at that time as well. And that's probably the best way to get the information if you haven't experienced anything yet. That way we can capture the realities, because whatever change we make based on your 2020 taxes, we're going to use that to do your aid for the following year. And so you've saved yourself some steps by getting that information to us early, and you've ensured that you know not just what to expect for this year, but what you might anticipate for next year as well. That helps your family plan. For those of you who've already experienced your losses, clearly you don't have 2020 taxes yet, and we'll be asking for them. So for your aid next year. So whatever offer we give you based on the adjustments for this current academic year, next year we'll be asking you for your 2020 tax returns so that those changes we can confirm. And we can also reflect them in next year's aid packages. So it's possible that this year's aid award doesn't look exactly like next year's, because we'll at that point in time have the ability to use actual data to adjust your aid offer. How to submit an appeal. So it's a pretty simple process. If it's a COVID appeal, we ask that you complete the COVID specific form that's available. But if it's outside of that, so maybe it is more related to those other topics I talked about, medical expenses, care of a family member, something along those lines, then there's actually something called the special circumstances form. And you can complete that. It has a number of check boxes, or you can just write in other, and you could submit that to our office for reconsideration. I think it's important as well to talk about the timeline for reconsideration when you complete a special circumstances form or the COVID appeal form. Our timeline on these, we'll begin reviewing them after the start of classes. And so your initial aid offer won't include consideration for these forms, because we're still working to get aid to the returning students based on some of the changes that have taken place in the last few weeks. And so we won't be able to review these circumstances until after the start of classes. And then we'll begin processing anything we've received on a rolling basis at that time. So again, I'm going to come back to, it's a short presentation, and that one of the most important things that you can know about this is we understand your circumstances may be individual and that we're here to help. Our website can be incredibly helpful. Email is the best way to get in touch with us for questions. We have our phone number listed here. And so if you call that number right now, we don't have the ability to answer the phone live as we work virtually. But you can leave a voicemail there, and then we can return your call at that point. So you can also find your financial aid counselor on Duke Hub. Your counselors are also listed on our website. You can see who we are and click on a link to email us straight from there. So I'm going to stop my screen share at this point, and we can open up the chat. Thank you for doing that. And so I'd like to open this up. We have reserved the majority of the time to answer your questions. And certainly we want to reserve space for questions about appeals and special circumstances. But no questions are off the table today. So if provided that they're related to financial aid. So please, let's go ahead and get started. I think Michael is going to be our MC for the questions today. And I'm happy to answer at will.
All right, thanks, Miranda. Okay, so we've got some questions rolling in here. The first one, will there be options for work study?
Yes, and that's a great question. We are still offering the work study program this year, and we are anticipating that there will be work study positions available to students. We know that the nature of those have changed from what we've seen in the past. Previously, everyone was able to work in a building on campus, in research labs and in libraries, and even working for individual departments in various capacities. A lot of our offices have moved to be virtual, and so you might see more virtual positions posted than what we would have seen in the past. That wasn't something that we as an institution were used to doing. And so we may see a delay in postings that are available because I know many offices are still trying to assess their needs for work study students. But those programs still exist. If you're not familiar with how to find work study jobs or where to see what jobs are available, we have a work study section of our website. It's right along the top bar. When you log in, it'll say work study. If you click on that, it lists several sites where work study jobs are posted. We would encourage you to look there early and often so that as departments begin posting those jobs, you are able to apply to the ones as they become available.
Thank you for that, Miranda.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on, our next question is, if I choose to go remote in the fall, will this impact my financial aid offer?
That is an excellent question. And it is the question of the hour, I think. So I'm glad that you asked it. Your financial aid does change if you are not on campus, and it depends. How it changes depends on whether or not you'll be living at home or whether you're going to be somewhere and paying rent. We know that you have living expenses regardless of where you are. So I'm going to talk about it in two different ways. First would be the student who may not be able to live on campus for one reason or another and is going to be renting a place. Perhaps going home isn't an option, but perhaps being in Durham isn't either. And so if you're renting in that situation, your aid would be the same as if you were here on campus. The difference is going to be that you're not going to be billed for housing and meals because, of course, you're not here to use them. And so your bill from Duke would go down by that amount. You would take that cost savings to then help you fund your costs off campus. Your aid is held constant in that scenario. For those students living at home, your aid does change because we expect you're not having those same rental expenses, but we do understand that you may have some expenses for shared utilities and meals with your family if you're living at home. And so there is some adjustment for that. So generally speaking, and this is a ballpark, so don't quote me on your individual aid package, but we're a general group here. And so I want to be able to address the question broadly. The difference that you would anticipate if you live at home versus coming to Duke and living on campus would be that your bill at Duke would probably be a couple of grand lower than what it would be if you were here on campus. And again, that cost savings is designed to help supplement your family for the additional expenses they would incur for utilities and food that you'd be sharing with them at home. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Miranda. All right, next question here. If we got an appeal in April, but are still seeing no income, should we fill out the application again?
Yes, you should. Thanks again for that question. So some of you filled out our COVID application to tell us about things that were happening back in April. It's okay to fill it out again. We understand that we were only able at that point, I think, to capture just a couple of months and barely that worth of change because COVID at that time was brand new. We're much further into this now. So just because you completed it before doesn't mean you can't reapply for an appeal again.
Thank you for the information, Miranda. All right, next question here. If a family member recently got hurt and is unable to work after I've already received my financial aid, does that still apply?
That's a good question. Typically, in a circumstance, what we would say is we would finish out the calendar year. You would be in the group that would give us your 2020 information when it's available. And then we would see what the actual earnings over the course or loss of earnings over the course of 2020 might look like for you. And again, we'd use that for next year as well. So you'd have consistency across this. That would, if your appeal is successful and we can see that there's loss of income there, we will pay that back retroactively. So it'll apply back to the fall semester and spring semester once we process that appeal.
Perfect. Thank you, Miranda. Next question here. I was getting aid because of a sibling being in college, but now that sibling is deferring for a year due to the college closure restrictions. Is there any way to get back some of that aid because our family is still supporting her rent?
So you wouldn't get back the same level of aid because what we do when you have a sibling in college is we understand the outlay for that sibling is significant because you're paying tuition in two places, not just their support. What we already take into consideration with your aid offer is that if someone's living in your household, it's one of those things that's already included in our formula. When somebody's living at home and you're providing their support, if you've let us know that on your aid application, that's already taken into consideration. So the adjustment that we make for a student not attending in college, when we roll that back, we're not pretending they don't exist anymore, but we are considering that they're in the household. So you would see the aid adjustment, but it won't go back to what it was while they were attending.
Perfect. Thank you, Miranda. Next question is, will the entire cost under the special circumstances, like say medical expenses, for example, be entirely used to reduce the family contribution and increase scholarship aid, or will it be used as a percentage?
That's a really good question in terms of, how do we come up with it and how do we calculate these things? And so the short answer to that question is it's generally not dollar for dollar. So, if you tell us, my family spent $20,000 last year on medical expenses, it does not mean that you'll receive $20,000 in grant aid and we would pay for the full extent of the medical expense that you had. It is a difference of percentage, and that actually is a function of income. That's kind of complicated and formulaic. And so the impact is different, but what we wouldn't want you to expect is a dollar for dollar change. It can increase your financial aid. It's something that we can consider as a supplement because we know your family had that expense, but we don't pay for 100% of what that cost was to your family.
Makes sense. Thanks, Miranda. All right, next question, moving on here. Should you fill out a special circumstances application if your parents are planning on separating?
That is also a great question. I'm really glad you asked because it's one that we get a fair amount. There's a lot of anxiety about what that might mean for your family. And so you can let us know that information because the impact of separation would be that you may be in a situation. Remember when we were going through the list in the presentation and I mentioned someone might have a job relocation and you might be supporting a couple of different places, a couple of different households. When someone separates, that's often the case as well. You're not receiving the cost savings of everyone being under the same roof. We wouldn't be able to make an adjustment based on an anticipated separation. So we would have to wait until we actually could get some documentation on the fact that they were trying to support two separate households in that way. And then at that point, you could let us know.
Thank you, Miranda. All right, next question is for QuestBridge. For the QuestBridge Match Scholarship recipients, do we need to renew our aid package? And for freshmen living on West Campus this year, would our aid package be adjusted correspondingly? For that, we have Meal Plan G.
Yes. So we are looking, well, I say yes to the first part of the question. I understand that was a two-parter. So let me address the first part, which is, as a QuestBridge student, would you need to reapply for aid every year? And the answer is you do. You need to complete the FAFSA every year for us to renew your scholarship. But for students broadly, and I know we have students from different backgrounds on the call, financial aid is annual. So every year you will reapply for financial aid because every year your taxes change. And so we base your financial aid off the most, well, sometimes it's 2-year-old tax data. You can give us your most recent tax data, but we update it as we move through time so that it better reflects your family's income and the changes that you're having financially. And so even though you may be a QuestBridge student, the federal government also requires that we collect data from you on an annual basis. So that's important to remember. With regard to your meal plan, we look at generally, this is the first, well, here's what I'll say. This is the first year we've ever had first year students living on West Campus. And so if you have a West Campus housing assignment and a differential food budget, I'm going to get back to you because we've never had to think about this before. We've always had our students housed all on East with the similar board plan. And I want to make sure that I get you the right answer on that so that we know what we're accommodating. And then once we have that, that's something that we can post on our FAQ.
Makes sense. Thank you, Miranda.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question here. How does money that our parents receive from unemployment affect financial aid?
Great question. We consider it income as we would income from any source. And so we know that when you lose a job, there may be a delay, and then eventually, and these days the delay is substantial, there may be delay, but then an unemployment check may come. That shows up on your taxes as income as well. So when you complete the COVID application, it will ask what your continued income sources are, and that includes unemployment. Unemployment is always at a reduced rate from what you were earning prior to being employed. And so we understand that your income is lower. But we would still take that into consideration as we think about how to process your appeal. Oh, I think you might be muted, Michael.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Sure, no problem.
All right. So our next question here, will the on-campus housing charges on our semester bill be prorated based on the number of weeks actually spent on campus?
No, my understanding is that we charge by semester. And so what you're seeing, we, for some historical information for you, what we're looking at in terms of charges, actually, I don't believe is as expensive as we would have seen in years past. And so you're going to have housing all over campus that was generally charged at higher rates. We didn't have the same housing rate across everywhere on campus. There were varying housing rates. And so for the first time, whether you're in a single, and many students are, some are in larger doubles, but we're actually charging the lowest rate of housing across campus we've ever charged for that. And so you wouldn't see any proration for it. It is per semester and not per day that you are there.
Thank you for that, Miranda. All right, last question here. It seems to be more housing related, but perhaps you can still shed some light. Mm-hmm. The question is, are we being charged the rate for single dorms, even if we signed up for doubles before mm-hmm. Duke decided freshmen would all have singles?
That's a good question. And you know, the amount that you're being charged is actually the standard double rate. And so you are being, again, I want to stress the changes that you're seeing, and I think this has not been a decision in any way designed to disadvantage students financially. That's not where it's coming from. They have worked tirelessly to try to find substantial housing for the first year class while also trying to maintain safety. But the room rate is actually the standard double rate, and that's being charged campus-wide.
All right, thank you for that. And that ends our questions on chat.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. And if we don't have any more, please feel free to check back. I want to stress our website. The Keep Learning website is where we'll post any financial aid updates. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out for us. We appreciate you being here, and we will talk to you later. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.